Hi everyone, and welcome to this next stage of the podcast. And today we've got a slightly different angle today where we're joined by an athlete that we've worked with previously. So welcome, Tom. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So Tom and I have worked together for probably nearly 10 years now, from the start of the PhysiQuip journey. So I'm very interested to delve more into his personal life and find out a bit more about how he got started. So on that note, Tom, how did you even find out that you were good at running? How did you get started in that?
Well, I think most kids, you sort of know if you're a fast runner or not from quite an early age. And I was always pretty sporty from races and junior school and stuff. I never sort of took athletics in itself seriously as a sport in its own right until I was probably 13, I think, 12, 13, where I sort of joined the local running club. So I ran for my school in a local cross-country race and did quite well, but just based on kind of football training and the other stuff that you do as a kid. And yeah, coach from the local club just sort of invited me down to sort of try out running. And from there, I still did all the stuff, played a lot of football until I was probably 16, 17. Although quickly realized that was never going to be a career for me, and probably athletics is more of a likely one. And as I got into that into my sort of later mid to late teens, I realized I was doing quite well at athletics and starting to have some success on a national level at English schools and things like that, and started to think about it more as a actual career then. So from there, I was able to earn a scholarship to go and run and compete and study in America, and that was a bit of a springboard really to sort of starting to compete on a higher level against really high quality opposition. So it just developed quite naturally and quite steadily over the years. I wasn't by any means like an instant success with running. I was a bit of a later developer than some of the guys I was running against, which is when you as a 13, 14-year-old, that's massive. Some of the guys you run against look like fully grown men, and there's little skinny me trying to keep up with them. But yeah, I did love it from the start, and I love the kind of pureness of it, where you realize you train harder, you run faster, and you just keep dreaming about how much faster you can constantly go. So that's what I really loved about it, and it just brought me to where I am now.
So in terms of the distance that you pick to run at, is that purely based on performance?
I guess so. I mean, I think as a young age, you sort of, like I said, I was probably slightly better than average at sprinting as well. But it was a cross-country race that my coach at Bolton saw me in and asked me to go and train for. And at that age, I don't think you really have sort of that much specialization. You're either a sprinter or a distance runner, and 1500 meters at that age is distance running, not middle distance really, I guess. So I just trained as a distance runner and fell into the 1500 and 800s and stuff like that, and just really enjoyed it. I guess I probably at that stage, although I was fairly fast, it's probably obvious I wasn't going to be a elite level sprinter any means, and I had a good endurance engine. So that's just the road I went down. And I think as I develop and get older, I realize I have decent speed over those sorts of distances, alongside being good at longer stuff as I got older, 5Ks and 10Ks and stuff. And that's sort of just the niche I went into, and it's the event that the 1500 especially is just the event that I've always enjoyed the most, really. I think it's for me it's the kind of blue ribbon event in athletics, and it's a good amount of time to sort of stay focused on for myself and for people watching it. And it's just quite an exciting race to be in. I think it's tactical, and so that's how I ended up being a middle distance runner, really.
And then when you decided to do the trip to America, was that with any goal in mind, or was that just because it's going to be great? You're going to America, it's a great experience.
Sort of. It was. So I actually initially went with the idea of just doing it 1 year there as a kind of gap year, really. So my plan was to go back to studying medicine in England, in Manchester. And I didn't want to, at that point, my athletics was sort of taking off a little bit, and I wanted to see what I could do and go and train in a bit more of a sort of professional environment. And this seemed like a really good opportunity to do that, where I could, put more time and effort into my training, but still be in a sort of university setting and maybe learn something. So I kind of went with that mindset to begin with, and then decided after that first year there, where I had really improved a lot in my athletics and really enjoyed being out there, that I would stay there and continue to try and improve. And at that age, I wasn't quite ready to sort of make senior level Great Britain teams, but I was definitely on the track to doing that. So it was a good place to kind of develop and improve. Because like I say, the standard there is so good, and you're racing against such good athletes week in, week out, that, it's you have to improve. So it was a really good stepping stone from being a good junior into a good senior.
Mm. And so where were you based? Where was the university?
I was in Florida, so Florida State University, which is in the north of Florida. It was, and I happened to, it was a good time for me to go, because it was a bit of we had a real good crop of athletes kind of come in at the same time there. So we won 2 national championships during my time there as a team, which is a huge deal in America to win the collegiate championships. We had, some really like Olympic medalist level sprinters there, decent field athletes and distance runners as well. So it's good to be part of a team as well that was having a lot of success. It was a really good crop of us that came through, so the athletics program there was really a big deal, and it was good to have a sort of high profile level of support and interest in, you're almost like a professional athlete there, with the sort of level of interest you get from outside on the collegiate program.
Mm. But like, how did that turn then? So like you go from the UK and you go over to a massive university like Florida State. Like what's the setup like there? Like how does
in America, at least in the university system, for a start, most of the universities you go to the sports programs are really well funded anyway, but particularly universities like the one I went to, Florida State, the ones that have the biggest and most successful American football teams tend to have the most amazing facilities and setups. And these, I think the Florida State football stadium holds around 80,000 people, and they would fill that for every single home game that they have. And they're essentially equivalent to, your Manchester United and big football teams that you have here. The games are televised live on the ESPN. The players are superstars that are nationally known. And so there's a lot of money that comes into the sports programs at these universities that then feeds into the facilities that they have. So, our gym that we had at university was as good as anything I've ever seen at anywhere back here in the UK. Just because they had that money to pump in, and it was all geared towards the American football team, but the other sports got to benefit from that. So for me, coming from training at Leverhulme Park in Bolton to this stadium and this amazing gym in Florida, it was a massive change, but it was great because you're part of a team and you've got all these other guys new there with you. So it really was a good, in lots of ways, was a good learning experience where you sort of eyes are open to the way, or the sort of kind of environment that professional type athletes operate in. It was really, for me, it was a really good experience.
And was that something you were expecting? Did you know what you were going into?
Not really, no. Like I got recruited by quite a few different universities to try and get me to go there, and I never had chance to go and visit any of these places beforehand. The sort of clincher for Florida State was that the coach from there flew over to England to come and meet me and met my family and stuff, and I got on with him, and I was like, right, okay, Florida is not a bad place to be at all. And I feel there was a few other British athletes that had been recruited to go there in that same year, so I knew there would be other people with me who are coming from a similar place, which helped as well. But that being said, I think, certainly the sort of other three big programs that recruited me, I think would have been equally amazing setups and good places to go as well.
Mm. So what were the type of athletes? Who were there any names that were?
Well, so we had one thing that always sticks out in my mind. We had, they have a big event called the Penn Relays in America, which is it's called a carnival of relays. So they have all sorts of different, not just your normal 4x4 and 4x1. They have things called sprint medley relay and the distance medley relays. So it's a weekend, it's a massive event. They have loads of high school teams there, loads of college team and professional teams go. And we entered a team into the sprint medley relay, which is 200 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters. And we had on the 200, we had Walter Dix, who won, I think he's won a bronze and a silver in the Olympics over 100 and 200 meters. We had another guy called Brian from Zimbabwe, who was like a 20.0 200 meter runner, which is, sub 20 is truly world class. 20.0 is, you're making Olympic finals probably. We had another guy, Ricardo Chambers from Jamaica, who was a 44-second 400 meter runner. So again, sub 45, you're talking Olympic semi-final, final level. And then me, who the previous year I'd run 1:45 for 800 meters, which is a good time. So we did this sprint medley relay with the aim of breaking the world record. I think it's the only ever world record attempt that I've knowingly been in before. But we had a really good chance. But the problem is, obviously, the 800 meters is the longest event in that relay, and therefore it's the place where you can win or gain or lose the most amount of time. Coincidentally, it's the only time I've ever raced in a full Lycra speed suit as well, because the whole team has to wear the same outfit. So all the sprinted guys obviously always wear these speed suits, and I, as a skinny distance runner, wasn't super comfortable in it, but I did it. But yeah, and the problem is that I'd run the 1:45 the year before in the height of summer when I'm in peak condition. And this happens in Penn Relays is in April. So really not a good time for me to try and go out and run a really fast 800 where you're still in base training. And so I got the baton in with a huge lead and went out really hard on world record pace, basically, to try and hold on. And the last 200 meters of it just ended up being the most painful thing ever, where I was just getting hunted down by this guy on the second place team. We ended up still winning the race, but I think I ran, 1:48 or 1:49 or something, which isn't bad on your own, just leading from the front. But I would have needed to be a couple of seconds quicker, I think, for us to get the world record. But yeah, that's obviously the sprint medley relay isn't something that's competed very often. So it's not like one of the top level world records, but all those guys on that team were really, truly elite level athletes, and that's, like I said, that's the thing with the collegiate system in America. All these guys come through that, and you're up against really top level people, pretty much every race you would go to. So it's really eye opening. It's really good learning experience as well.
And so what's it like going into that environment? Like, how do you spend your days? Like, what were you studying even? Like, what was the scholarship for?
So I did, well, the scholarship was based on athletics. So you can have sort of academic scholarships or athletic scholarships. And it's unusual for a sports person to have a non-athletic scholarship, really. But I was studying exercise physiology. I basically just chose it as something that I thought would be interesting and something that would help me if I went back into medicine when I go back to the UK. And yeah, to be honest, the education system is a bit different over there. So actually, in that first couple of years that I did there, nothing I did in university was any harder than what I'd done at A levels back home. So I'd obviously done the chemistry, physics, and biology A levels to go to medical school, and nothing came close to that in terms of how difficult it was, really. So for me, it was quite nice to have, I was going to classes obviously and doing all this, the studying and stuff, but I didn't have to actually really apply myself that much. academically. And so the sport, the running side of things was, I could have more of my attention. And like I said, it's real structure, it's a real team setup, and the team meets for practice at the same time every day, and you have your gym times and so on. And traveling to meets together and flying across the country to go and do these races was good. And going from that to competing on the European circuit professionally, for example, it was a good experience to have, because all of a sudden your agent tells you, right, you're running in this race in Spain on Saturday, and here's your flights, and basically that's it. You pack your bags and you go. And I remember the first few meets of having to do that on my own was, it's quite a, for a young athlete, it's not an easy thing to go through. So I was grateful for the experience in Florida to learn a bit about that.
And in terms of like the makeup of your day, then, if the studying isn't that onerous on you, like how were you mixing with Walter Dix and those guys a lot? Like,
So we actually lived, certainly for 1 or 2 of the years, I lived next door to Walter Dix, and there's 4 of us in each house. And I was still going to classes. I can't remember what the sort of hours we had of classes each week, but yeah, it wasn't like actually being a full-time athlete when I moved back home and had nothing else, where you're just literally lounging around all day waiting for the next training session. You were doing stuff, which was actually quite nice. So you'd have, and also at the same time as well, as a 21-year-old in Florida at university, you're doing the normal university stuff as well. So when I think back to some of the nights of like going out drinking before a race or a training session or something, like I look back now and think like, oh God, I could never, wouldn't want to, but wouldn't physically be able to handle like a big night out and then go train the next day. But that stuff's all part of, of university and for anyone, and no different for being on on the track team. So, it was, I think lots of people have really good memories of university in general. And for me, it's no different. I definitely enjoyed myself and had a good time there. But a lot of that came from this team sort of spirit and environment that you're in, where, the vast majority of my friends were guys that I knew from the running team or from other teams within the university that you mix with.
That does sound an amazing experience, actually. The English accent always goes down well in America as well. So
yeah, it does. Yeah, but yeah, so they often mix it up for Australian or Irish or something, but just get away with whatever you want.
Yeah, no, exactly. So once you've done that in America, then at what point were you thinking, right, medicine, we're going to hold off on that and we're going to make a career in athletics?
Probably for definite after 2 years in America. So after the first year, I deferred my place for another year, thinking I'll do another year in America and then go back. And then
you offered a place in medical school at that point then?
Yeah, so I had a place at Manchester University, and I deferred it for 1 year to go to America, and then asked them after that first year, can I defer for another year? And they said, okay. And then after the second year, I was like, I don't think I'm going to come back just yet. So I didn't feel ready to go back into that, because I felt it would have been too much to then take on something like that when I really thought I can go to the Olympics, I can do good things in athletics. And I would always regret it if I didn't, commit the time and dedication to it. And then, so then over the next 2-3 years of being in America, then again, just continue to improve, continue to put down some quite good times. But, again, at that point, you're not certain that you're going to be able to make a career out of it or anything. You're not allowed to accept any sort of sponsorship or money or anything while you're in the collegiate system anyway. But it wasn't until 2008, once I'd qualified for the Olympics, where I actually got offered any kind of contract with companies to sort of sponsor me. So until that point, you're not a professional athlete, and you're not necessarily, that's not your career necessarily. So it was always in the back of my mind, okay, what am I going to do if I get a bad injury, or I just not good enough or something? But fortunately, I was able to sort of keep progressing and make a career out of it.
So yeah, so for Beijing then, at what point did you realise that that was a realistic possibility?
Well, it was quite a jump in time actually, where in my 1500-meter time, from the start of that year to when I ran the qualifying time in Oslo. I can't remember exactly what. I think I went from 3:38 or 3:37 down to a 3:35, which was a qualifying time in this particular race. So at that point, it became quite real. And I actually won the race as well. And at that point, it became quite real that that's a big checkbox ticked, where there wasn't too many other people that were close to running that time. So I knew, even regardless of what would happen at the trials, I had a good chance of being selected. And then, like I said, that's the point where suddenly sponsors are interested and wanting to sort of have you wearing their shoes in the Olympics and stuff. So it was kind of, obviously it's, for anyone, it's the Olympics is a big goal in your head in any season when there's an Olympics coming. But it became real at that point where I ran that time and realized, I can get faster, and also I can, I can compete with these guys on a high level.
What are you thinking as well? Like, how is that stressful? Is it exciting? Like the prospect of running in the Olympics? It's if that's been a lifelong dream. What's going through your head?
Yeah, yeah. Of course, it's exciting. It's massive, and more so when you actually get there and you see. Feel quite lucky that Beijing was the Olympics I got to go to, because the operation itself was just huge, and I think it's still the Olympic Games that has had the most money spent on it in terms of everything from the opening ceremony to the village and so on. It was just a huge. You could tell you were part of something absolutely massive, and just the way. I remember in Beijing, the way anyone looked at you when they saw you've got an athlete kind of accreditation around your neck. They were just in awe of you, kind of thing, and it was just an amazing thing to be part of, and it's still even now. I feel very proud and it's a really special thing to be able to say to someone you're an Olympian and you've been to the Olympics, and it always comes up in conversation with, if someone's introducing me or I'm talking and meeting someone new. I don't actually particularly like to mention it myself as you sort of try and be humble about these things, but it does come up, and people, it's nice to see people. It really means a lot to people, like, wow, that's something special that you've been able to go to an Olympics. And I am really, really proud of it. And I want to try and go to another one if I can before I retire.
Yeah. So in terms of that, then, like, you've had injury problems. Then, at what point did they come in? Was it how soon after Beijing was that?
Well, I had 2010 was actually my best year in terms of times and performances, and obviously at that point in that year, you're not thinking this is the best it's ever going to get, and realistic for me, over 1500s, certainly I don't expect I'm going to be able to run that fast again. Just that was 25 and in my prime sort of thing. But yeah, so it's a bit of a weird journey with sort of a couple of years of sort of illness and problems that then started when I came back from that, started to sort of get issues with Achilles. Really was my main problem that I had from my sort of later 20s onwards, and ironically now I'm much better at managing it, and it's been fine for a couple of years. But yeah, it's a big thing you sort of learn, where I look back now and I look at the training I did as a younger athlete, and obviously it was good training, but when I look at it and think about the intensity of it and how much I was doing, not in terms of mileage, but there's really hard sessions on the track where you just smash yourself probably 3 times a week, crawling off the track. One of those now would not set me back, but it'd take me a much longer time to recover. And that's not to say I can't still do really good things, but you just have to be a little bit smarter about what basket you put your eggs in, and try and pick the right sessions that you get the most bang for your buck from. And also, especially, the time of year as well, even in the winter in the past, I'd try and smash every session as hard as I can. And I remember someone telling me it's far better to be at 80%, 100% of the time, rather than at 100%, only 80% of the time. So, if you're smashing it through November and December and pick up an injury in January, that can really set you back for the summer. So as long as I can get to sort of March, April, having had a pretty clear run of consistency, I know that'll put me in good stead for the season ahead. And that's exactly what I had last winter. I had a really good winter last year, and sort of March time, coming back from my training camp in South Africa, I was, as fit as I've been for a long, long time, which was really frustrating, obviously, then to have no races to go and do for the rest of the season. So hopefully I can do that again. Like I said, I do try and be smart about things and listen to my body as much as I can, and try and not push unnecessarily, and just think about the value of anything you're doing. If particularly a lot of distance runners get hung up on mileage, and if your target is 80 miles for the week and you get to Sunday and you've only done, you're 4 miles short, a lot of people think, no, I have to get to 80, I'm going to go out and do another jog this evening. And for me now, I would sort of stop and say, well, what value do I get from that 4 miles? Probably nothing. It's probably much more likely to cause me an injury. So why bother? And it's not laziness. It's just thinking, what actually are you getting from it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question I asked John Rogers, and he said how he thinks it's been really helpful for him, having been an athlete and being an athlete, to be able to help manage the people that he would treat.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, like, how do you think, if you knew what you know now, you would have been much better, or would it have been a different outcome?
I don't know. I think I've been really fortunate in a lot of ways to have the right coach at the right time and be in the right races, and also, for example, now in 1500 meters is really high standard, and even if I was in my prime now, I wouldn't necessarily be an Olympian, because of the standard is definitely, or the depth is definitely better than it was in 2008. But yeah, I think there's definitely things that anyone can look back on and say, yeah, if I could have done this differently, or it might have been, might have had different results. I think for me, not in terms of the training that I did or the application that I put into it, because I know I always push myself really hard, and that was probably my biggest strength, was being able to really, really hurt myself in training. I think for me, my only regrets come actually from races themselves, and maybe times where I've not run to my strengths or used quite the right tactics. For example, in the Olympics, like I feel I should have made it out of the heats, and I didn't, because I probably wasn't brave enough earlier in the race. So there's lots of little things like that yeah, I wouldn't say I regret, but definitely look back on and think, okay, I could have done that slightly differently. But again, there's lots of people who train really hard for a long, long time and don't get to do the things that I've done. So I don't, I feel very lucky to have been able to do what I've done.
And so you mentioned then, in terms of the coaches you've worked with and medical professionals and so on, how have they come about that you've worked with those particular people at those times?
Well, coaches wise, I think my first coach, and the coach I had when I went to the Olympics, was a local coach, Norman Poole, who I'd run quite well in America, and British Athletics had sort of put me in touch with him, because he was also coaching Michael Rimmer at the time, and so we kind of gelled quite nicely together, as him as an 800 meter runner and me as a 1500 meter runner, and he was my training partner then for a few years to come, and we worked really well together. And then, yeah, different times as sort of, I've not had loads of coaches actually. So I went from Norman to a New Balance sponsored group in Manchester, which I was sponsored by New Balance at the time. And it's sort of, it was just a good opportunity for me to sort of be, again, in a sort of professional team environment, as opposed to the previous group, which was a real mix of types of athlete and levels of athlete, which is, you know, fine, but just a different environment where it's very much more a full-time athlete focused group. And then from that group there, I went to the coach I have now, which is Steve Cram, who basically was a really good fit for this stage in my career where, you know, he's not telling me how far to run every single day and setting my strength training and all these other little micromanaging things. You know, he plans the sessions out and he plans the sort of season and the peaking and so on, and what we need to be doing at different times. But he, you know, he appreciates that I'm experienced and I know what's worked for me as well, and I know what I can and can't do. So you know, he's my coach, but he's also, like, more than anything, just a sounding board for things, and it works. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. It works really well, and we have a good relationship that way.
And in terms of that, then, throughout this last 9 months or so, is that been remote management? Do you meet up?
Yeah, we've been able to meet up occasionally. So at times when we've been allowed, we would normally, so sort of halfway between us is Leeds. So he also has another athlete, Laura Waitman, who's based in Leeds. So I'd often drive over to there to do track sessions. Ordinarily through the summer, once a week at least, I'd be over there on the track. And yeah, so where it's allowed, we've met up. But obviously, yeah, also this year with not much track races on in general, we've tried to avoid getting on the track too much anyway, just for risk of injury. And, you know, if there's no particular track race I'm training for, then, you know, I can do stuff on the grass or on the roads and trails instead, just to stay fit without sort of trying to sharpen up and put spikes on.
So I know that you moved into doing other work alongside all of this, but how do you see it? Like, what's it like living? They're going to give you about 4 questions here. So for one, what's it like being a professional athlete where you've got a lot of free time on your hands? So there's that one. But then also now, how would it be for professional athletes who haven't got other things like you have at the moment going on? How, from a mental standpoint and physical, but how do you think it is for them to be able to manage their own training, and if they're not racing or training as much?
Yeah, it's well, it's an interesting one. So one of the big things you learn or have to learn quickly as a full-time athlete, you know, I went from, like I was saying, from university setup where you've got a schedule set out for you in terms of your classes and you've got your running training schedule set out, to being a full-time athlete where you have a coach and who sets your training sessions and so on, but the rest of your life is up to you and you have to plan everything else around that. That's difficult, and you have to learn how to use your free time. You know, I remember, I think I've talked about this before, where first, you know, few months back from university, you have all this free time. You think, right, what am I going to fill with it? I'll go and walk around the Trafford Centre, or I'll go to Manchester, or, you know, go and see people and stuff. And it sounds sort of pathetic, really, but, you know, walking around the Trafford Centre for a couple of hours is actually really tiring. And if you go and try and do a really hard track session after that, you can feel it in your legs. You're like, my legs are flat today because I've been on my feet all day. And you have to learn that actually you have this free time because you've committed to trying to run as fast as you possibly can. And so you have to focus on making sure that session you have that evening is going to be as good as it possibly can. And that means getting your feet up, resting, and not doing anything that's going to, you know, take away from the session. It's a really important thing to learn. And it's, you know, everyone has their own, you know, balance where they have to have things they have to do and so on. You know, I sort of started learning Spanish when I came back from university, just to have something to think about and focus on. So I think it is. I mean, the other thing is I've trained with people who are very, very good athletes who have full-time jobs, and it works for them. They're able to, you know, spend all day not thinking about running and then turn up to training and train really well. So it is different for different people. I think for me, if I was, or I certainly know people I've trained with who non-stop are thinking about athletics and training and so on. And I know that wouldn't work well for me, especially if, you know, when you pick up injuries and stuff, if that affects your whole life and your general happiness and how you interact with other people, it's, you know, it's not healthy. So it is important to be, you know, athletes tend to define themselves by how fast they're running or what races they're winning. But everyone's a human being, right? And they have to define themselves by their other qualities. And it's important to have those things where if athletics goes wrong or your sport, you know, you get injuries, whatever it might be, you've got something else that you can look to and say, okay, well, I'm doing this anyway, or, you know, whatever it might be. So I think it's an interesting one. It's something that I think there's no one answer for, because I think lots of athletes deal with it differently. And some people are quite happy not having much else going on and can sit there on their own and just watch TV all day, whatever it might be. And others need little bits of things to do and focus on. So yeah, it's an interesting one, that really. It's something that you've got to kind of find your own path to, I think.
And is that something that you would talk through with your coach, like understanding you as a person?
I don't know if I've ever really had that conversation as such with a coach about what to do with your free time or how to manage that time. Certainly, I remember there's been points where, for example, British Athletics would have kind of lifestyle managers who would help talk to you about, okay, what sort of things you can do. So there are, there's resources out there for support with that. I think the coach athlete thing is more to do with understanding how people act and think around training and how you might respond. I know my coach knows with Laura, who he coaches as well, he often doesn't tell her the workout until we get to the track, because he knows maybe she might not panic about it, but might, go over it a lot of times in her mind and start, creating traps for herself. Whereas, I don't mind if he tells me 2 days before or whatever, or on the day, like I'll just turn up and do it, and that's fine. So I think that's the kind of, those sorts of little things are what the coach and athlete the coach might be learning about the athlete without sort of letting them know that they're learning it, and you sort of spot little things that coaches are doing, and they're sort of learning about you as a person. You try not to think about it, but if they realize, you start thinking, well, are they just telling me this because they know I'm going to panic about it if they tell me something else or not? And you start becoming aware of those things. But it is a skill, I think, to be able to manage your athlete that way and know what's going to help and what's going to actually cause, a bit more anxiety or whatever it might be.
And in terms of that, as you get a lot of work on the physical side, do you ever get support, or is there support available for that, the mental aspect of, for one, being a professional athlete, but also that management of how you should be dealing with injuries or free time or whatever it may be?
I know through British Athletics, when you're on the sort of, the funding program, there's those sorts of things available where you can speak to someone about, your career options after sport, or the time management things and stuff like that. And same from a psychology perspective, there's sports psychologists available that they can suggest, and you can go and see. I was really lucky, again, myself and Michael, when we were training with Norman, we got to meet Steve Peters, who'd done a lot of work with British cycling, and we were really lucky to be able to see him quite regularly over those years, and that was huge. It was really amazing person to be able to get the help of, and that was something we were quite lucky, really, to be able to organize, and not everyone sort of has access to that sort of thing. So for anyone, it's how much you're willing to sort of invest, not necessarily financially, but to go out and seek that help if you want it. It's obviously available, but some people might not think it's necessary. It's certainly psychological support. Some people don't see the value in it as much as others, and then they're not going to go and seek it out. So, but I think it's there for people to go and find it if they want.
Were there any particular things that he would say that you can remember now that you thought, yeah, that actually really resonated?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, I think that the way you sort of think about, so what I was talking earlier about tactically in races, and how you approach races, and how if someone asked me before a race, what's your best chance of winning this race, I'd know what the answer is, which for me is not a sort of typical last 100 meters kicker. It would be to go from further out. I would know that, but then 8 times out of 10, it would come to a race and I get to that last, 400 meters where I need to start kicking, but your brain tells you, Tom, you're knackered here. This is going to hurt. Wait, just hold off and try and win a different way. But, in the race, that's what's going on in your head. But again, if you ask me that 2 days before the race, I'd say, no, you've got no chance of winning that way. Why would you consider doing that? And it's obvious, but it's so, I don't know if you're familiar with his stuff, but this chimp paradox, where this kind of part of your brain is just all about kind of sort of self-preservation and defending you, this sort of fight or flight stuff. Your chimp's telling you, you're about to experience a lot of pain here. Let's not do that. Let's be safe and stay in the pack and hope against hope that you can win this race another way. So the things we talk about a lot were kind of putting things in place to make sure that you're not even having that discussion in your head in the race. You just get to that point and right, 400 meters to go. That's when I kick, because that's my best chance to win. And it happens where you get to that point and it's like I say, you don't think about it. It just happens and you go and, like a click, right? It's like a sort of switch in your brain that you go and do it. And I'm wary of speaking about this like as if I'm an expert in it, because I'm not. And there's plenty of races since then where I've still done the wrong, made mistakes. But that's the principle, and everyone can kind of relate to it, where something starts hurting, or you just, setting your alarm in the morning, you need to get up at 7 a.m. to go and do whatever it is before your 9 a.m. meeting or whatever. But it gets to that point in the morning and you hear the alarm and you're like, 10 more minutes in bed, I can get away with that. Like, if you ask yourself the night before, can you get away with 10 minutes extra? You'd say, no, I need to get this 2 hours in before. So those sorts of things are really simplistic, but really powerful, I think, to know about, to try and, get in your head before. And it takes practice to do that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So are there any other people that have had inspirational impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few. I'd say, plenty of people who I've trained with, plenty of people who, you see doing the little extra bits that make them a little extra bit better. That's the great thing about training camps a lot of times, actually, is you see other athletes and how they work and how they, commit to getting something right. And you see others that aren't doing that, and you sort of think to yourself, yeah, well, I've already beat you now, because I know you're not doing all this stuff, and you're not necessarily taking it seriously. So that sort of stuff, I'd say it's hard to name any individuals, but definitely there's people you come across where you think, yeah, this person is really good, and I can see why, because they're not sort of saying, oh, it's okay to have a couple of beers tonight, or they're not saying, I can stay up a bit later than I was planning. They just do the right things. And it's really powerful to see other people doing that and having success from it. But again, I'll say it's a bit of a balance, where on the individual, if you're living like a total monk, 10 months of the year and not enjoying it, and, just not sort of not living your life really, then that can be draining in another way too, where it's not sustainable. So I think it's important to find that balance, but also be aware of your chimp again making excuses for you and saying, oh, I want to enjoy myself, so I'll have a beer. And actually, you've got to weigh those things up and say, is this mentally healthy versus physically unhealthy, and so on. So yeah, again, that's probably one of the big things that you learn as you get older. Unfortunately, I wish I knew those things more, or had a better grasp of those things as a younger athlete.
And are there any particular things in your career that you mentioned about getting to the Olympics and that being a massive, massive moment? Are there any other particular incidences that have been just, you're going to remember those and be really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, well, to get to the Olympics that whole season, so running the time to qualify was, like I said, a big breakthrough in terms of seconds off my PB. Winning the trials then to cement my place in the team, beating Mo Farah and a couple of other really, our top middle distance guys in that race. To do that, it was something I'll always remember. And then there's a couple of occasions going back to the stuff I was talking about with Steve Peters, where the races I'm most proud of haven't gone very well. Like, as in, I've not won or I've not got the time I wanted. But one of them that I always talk about is the national championships in America when I was in college there. And I went into the race as one of the favourites, but again, knowing that I was not one of the biggest kickers in the race, I knew if it was a slow pace to begin with, that I'd have to kick from quite a long way out. And I'd planned it and thought this through and committed to it with my coach that, okay, 600 meters to go, that's when I'm going to make my move, which is really early in a really painful way to try and win the race. But I did it. I got to that point. I hit the front, built up a massive lead, and then just had lactic like you've never seen before in the last 100 meters and crawled home. And just one guy from the pack behind just burst and just dipped me on the line. And I ended up missing the national championship by, I think, 1/1300th of a second. And, you know, like I said, winning the national championship is huge, a huge deal there. And actually, as someone leaving university at that point, it would have been a big deal for me financially as well to be in. So it was a massive thing to not win that race. And obviously I was upset, but looking back at it, I was so proud of myself to attack that race the way I did and give myself, I wouldn't have been in the top 3 if I'd have waited to kick in the last 100 meters or so. So I gave myself the best chance possible to win it. And that's exactly what we would talk about with Steve Peters is, you know, what is your best chance to win this race? Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, just lost a second. And yeah, just commit to it. So and that's probably the key word that you learn more and more through my career is just commitment. Like it's not motivation, because that comes and goes. It's just commitment. Like there's days when I'm totally unmotivated and I don't want to get out and train, but I'm committed. You know, right now I'm committed to giving myself the best shot of making Tokyo Olympics next year. So you do it, you just get it done.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because as an outsider and someone that doesn't know that much about sprinting or athletics, it's always difficult because you're just running in inverted commas.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, how do you've trained for it so often, but then you've got the variables of the other athletes that you're against. So it's always quite difficult, certainly from like 100 meters perspective, like tactics in that it's difficult to look at. I know it gets more so, but yeah. How much do you think is tactics, like the events, your physical prowess as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing that I always talked about with Steve Peters, because he's a phenomenal sort of age group masters sprinter. So he's 200 meter, 400 meter world record holder, I think, for his age. And obviously the tactical aspect of that is much different from running middle distance. Especially if you look at 100 meters, okay, they have like a drive phase and so on, but essentially the gun goes and you just run as fast as you can and you stay in your lane. There's no one going to cut you up and so on. And there's all these variables to think about in a 1500 meter race that you can't prepare for, and you can't sort of say, you can't think through every eventuality in the race beforehand. So that kind of puts a block on this whole, okay, at this point, make this move, because the race could be very different when it actually comes to it. So, but again, the sort of way around that is having kind of, there are things that I can set in my head beforehand. If I go through 800 meters in slower than 1:58, I know that's a slow race, and we've not taken much out of the kickers in the race. So I know then I have to, make a move to try and do that at that point. So regardless of what anyone else is doing, at that point, that's something you're going to have to do. So you can still prepare and still plan. There are definitely people that are tactically better at those sort of things. There's people who are just naturally talented and can get themselves out of any situation just because they're that much better. But yeah, going back to your question earlier, that's probably having a better grasp of that is probably my biggest regret, is that there's times where I should have been more aware of what my strengths are and also had the commitment to do that and impose that on a race. It's much easier to do when you're a kid and you know, you're the fastest in the race by 10 seconds or something. So you just set off and go and run as fast as you can. And, you know, no one can live with you. But in a, you know, an Olympic level or a world level or whatever it might be, you're not going to run away from people like that. So it's, you know, you have to be gutsy to try and do that, and trust in yourself that you've got the ability to run the kick out of some of these people, and you know, give yourself a good shot of actually winning.
Yeah, no, I think it is fascinating, that whole area. So in terms of what's happened now then for next year, like what's the plan? What are your objectives in terms of both in terms of your athletics, but then what are your plans beyond athletics?
Yeah, so actually my plan, if all things have been normal, was to try and qualify for Tokyo Olympics this summer. So this was going to be really my last year of trying to compete at a high level. Certainly try and train at a high level. So I've kind of postponed that for another year now. So it's I've got another sort of 9 more months of trying to make it to the Olympics. It's 8 more months, something. But yeah, so I've started. I was, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been doing some part-time work for a genetics company called DNA Fit, and they're actually doing a lot of the COVID testing now for Premier League clubs and other projects around the country. So I'm doing much more work and stuff, working full time for them now, which is at the moment still allowing me to train as much as I want to, but that's probably something I'd go more into, and you know, within that company. I know hopefully COVID's not going to still be around in years down the line, but within that, it's definitely been a good learning experience for me this year to have something to focus on that isn't athletics, because there's not been much athletics to focus on, and just learn about, you know, a different career path that I can potentially go down once I decide to sort of hang up the spikes. But yeah, as I say, for the moment, I'm still training. I'm hopefully going to go off on a couple of training camps this next year, the start of, you know, January, February next year. And yeah, see what I can do. I still feel physically fit. I'm healthy at the moment, and I feel like I can still do a lot of good stuff on the track. So that's what I want to try and do. And for me, it's, you know, it's, if I get to August and I've not made the Olympics, or I've not run as fast as I want to, I think the only regrets I'd have would be if I feel like I've not given 100% to try and do that. You know, if I've turned over every stone and done, committed as much as I know I can, if I've not done that, then that's when I'll feel pretty, you know, down on myself. So I want to make sure this year I do give it the, you know, the effort that it deserves, and see where I can get to, really.
Yeah, no, well, that sounds good. Well, I'll wish you the very best of luck on that. And finally, I meant to ask this earlier on, but have you got any tales from the Olympic Village that you can share?
What time is this going to be released? Is it post watershed?
I can mark it as explicit content. There's no problem.
No, I mean, it's like I say, it's just a bit of a surreal experience. I was actually talking about this the other day, where it's like going into the school canteen, these big dining halls you have, and I remember sitting down for breakfast one day, and this guy comes and sits directly opposite me on these rows of tables. And I look up, and it's Rafael Nadal. And it's just surreal. He just sat there, sort of like say hey to him, and he's this mega superstar, and even, you know, quite unusually for, you know, I would never cross paths with someone like Kobe Bryant, but of course there's basketball Olympics and the USA teams there just wandering around the Olympic Village, and you just walk past and see these giant guys pass you. Like, is that Kobe Bryant? And it's just totally surreal. Same with, like, I think Ronaldinho I bumped into at some point in Beijing, and you just kind of just in awe of them. But it's also then you have to sort of remind yourself, well, I'm here too as an Olympian, and we're on this kind of, you may earn quite a bit more money than me, but we're on a sort of even pitch here. You know, we're all here as athletes at, you know, the top of your game. So it's very, very strange experience, and it's really, you know, like I said, you'd never come across those people in normal life. So it was just, yeah, it's just great to kind of cross paths with them like that.
Was that before or after you started doing your Spanish lessons that you met?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't proficient enough to try and chat to him about his breakfast.
Brilliant. No, Tom, that's been great. So thank you very much for your time. The very best of luck in your preparation for the Olympics. Really hope you make it there. And if you do, we'll definitely have you back on and you can tell us about the next stars that you met.
Yeah, tell you about the other celebrities I've met in the Olympic Village.
No, I'll get them on and they'll be telling me about you. So that'll
yeah, true. That'll be, yeah. I'll have to make sure I'm memorable in some way to them.
Good man, really thank you for your time and we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Andy. Thanks a lot.